we guess we haven't talked about this yet. I was going to ask how we log out.
Huh?
I said, I guess we haven't talked about this. I was going to ask how you log out.
Yes, we haven't talked about how you log out,
Okay.
right? Because obviously here I'm skipping past the login screen if I'm already logged in. Make sense? So that's going to skip you past this first screen, put you immediately on main activity. Well, things we can do if you are on main activity and you're testing this, you can hit the back arrow, and guess where the back arrow will take you right now? It'll take you back here.
Because you never finished this activity? Or
Because it finished the main activity and it puts you back at login activity. Okay? That's fine. We're going to change that so that the back doesn't work later. Okay? As part of how we're going to implement the login. Okay? But you can see from a testing perspective if you need to log in to somebody else. Right now I can hit back and then log in as somebody else. Make sense? What's up?
Remember when you said that screen rotations don't persist the activity, that they restart it?
No, that they destroy it and recreate
They
it.
destroy it and recreate it?
Yep.
It's rotating the screen when you've gone back to the login automatically logs you in.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is a bug, right?
Yeah,
So if I turn it like this, it's going to destroy that login activity and recreate it. When it recreates that activity, the new activity, it's going to call this code on it. Yeah. So that's a weird case, but we're going to fix that.
Okay.
We're going to fix that by changing how the login works, the logout works, to make sure that the logout actually works, right? Because if the user actually gets logged out, then that won't be a problem. But the problem is we haven't implemented the logout yet. Okay. Other things I want to do before I get to the logout though. Remember we moved some things around in the manifest? Remember that I made this login activity is kind of our main activity now, and main activity isn't the main activity? Everybody tracking with me there? Main activity is really a bad name now. So we probably should go ahead and rename this activity to something else. Make sense? So what would be a better name for main activity? What's the purpose of this activity?
To list to the movies or the games, whichever app you're on.
Right. So, like, it would make more sense to rename this to either game list activity or movie list activity. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to refactor, rename that main activity to make that more clear. So, refactor, rename. This is now game list activity.
Except the movie list if you're on the movie list one, right?
Oh, yep, that'd be movie list. Correct. Correctamundo. So I need this to be movie list for me. One kind of weird behavior that I wish that Android would fix, but isn't that way. I renamed the activity class. Look at the name of the layout. Activity main. So one thing to be aware of when you rename an activity is it doesn't rename the layout. It doesn't rename the layout. So you have to manually go in and rename the layout. So this layout would now be rename. This would be activity movie list. So I have to manually go change the name of both the activity and the layout. Cool. That helped from a readability standpoint at least, just to know, hey, we can change both of those things. So that's one of the things I want you to definitely do for the lab is rename main activity, both the class and the layout. Rename those as I've done here. Okay. So let's talk about what we want to do for sign out. Okay. If I go to, oh no, before I do sign out, I need to talk about, no, let's go ahead and do sign out. All right, so movie list activity, remember now, is the place that they go after they log in. Is everybody clear with that? After they log in, okay. I want to make sure there that up navigation, if it exists, behaves the same as back navigation. Right now there's not an up navigation button. But I want to make sure that if there ever was, that it would behave the same. Okay, so kind of like we did with movie details, remember that I overrode this on option item selected? I need to do the same thing over in movie list. So at the end of movie list, I'm going to override on option item selected, and we're going to say, hey, if you press home, let's treat that as on back pressed. Okay. So if you did try to do an up navigation, then it's going to behave the same as back navigation. That means the only thing I have to fix is back navigation. Everybody following me with that? So I want to change back navigation so that basically the user is not allowed to do it. Okay. So if I go in here, notice that I'm calling on back pressed. Let's try to override on back pressed. Actually, I think I might be looking at the wrong, I'm not sure if this is the right method. Let me double check my notes here. Custom back navigation. And I think what happens, let me just test this real quick. I think yes, that works. So log I log tag So if I look at the console, I'm going to put a log message in there. If I press back, you can see the back pressed in the log. Okay. So this function gets called anytime the user presses back on the device, right? And you might notice here we're calling that method from up here as well, right? So if the user presses home or they press back, then now it's calling on back pressed. Cool? Now, by default, it would go back to the previous activity, right? Notice that I've commented out super.onBackPressed. You see that? So when we're overriding methods, right, calling the super method says call the parent class's version of this method, okay, which typically we want to do. Typically we do want to have the parent able to do its behavior. But notice if I comment it out, then none of the parent class's behavior for onBackPressed happens anymore. You see that? Because I basically made a new version of this which does nothing but log. It doesn't actually go back anymore. So everybody see that? So that, just doing that, just commenting out that one line will prevent the user from being able to go back. Make sense? Pretty easy, right? Pretty simple. all I need to do is tell this function not to do anything, right? All I need to do is say, don't do the parent class's behavior, okay? But I want to provide the user a way to actually to sign out. Does that make sense? The reason I'm preventing that on back is because I don't want the user to accidentally sign out, right? I want that to be a button in our UI effectively where the user has to be intentional about it. Make sense? Mm-hmm. I want the user to be intentional if they want to sign out. I don't want that to happen accidentally. So we want to put that in a different place. Okay. I'm going to jump over to some documentation here, and I'll come back in a minute. But I want to talk about how I'm going to do that. So I'm going to use something in Android called a menu. Okay. If you look at the documentation, here's the main documentation page for working with menus. It's not something we've talked about yet, but we need to talk about it by now. Okay. So there's a few different menus, right? Menus are kind of a general, usually drop down that the user can pick from a set of options. Okay. Menus can appear in a few different places. So one of the places that menus can appear is in the application bar up at the top of the screen. They can also appear in contextual menus, so like you can think about a right click or a long press on some UI element might bring up a contextual menu, so we can see menus there as well. Similarly for pop-up menus for things like the spinner is kind of maybe a menu, even though we're not using a menu resource to populate. Okay. So the way we define a menu is we actually define it in XML, okay? We're going to define it as an XML resource, okay? That XML resource uses a few tags. So for instance, we've got a menu tag, which is here's a menu or a group of items. Within there we have an item tag, which represents a single menu item, an option in the menu. You can also add groups to group related menu items together if you have a lot of them. Okay? So that's kind of the overview. In terms of the items, all the items need to get a unique ID. That's part of how we'll determine which menu item you clicked on is based on the ID. They typically get an icon. We may want to have an icon for those menu items, which we'll need for what we're going to do with it. We also add a title, which is the text that the user sees, or the screen reader reads in terms of what that item does. And then there's also an option here for show as action. Okay, now show as action is only used when you're using it in the options menu / application bar, which is what we're going to do. Okay, so show as action says either it should be in the overflow menu or it should be up in the quick access area. We'll talk about that here in a minute. So when we're using a menu as in the case what we're going to do is you see creating an options menu. Okay, an options menu is available from the top right corner in the app bar. Typically what you'll see is there'll be like a triple dot over in the top right corner. You click on that, that'll collapse down, bring down, and you'll see a list of options. Okay, so that's what we're going to add to the movie list activity, is we're going to add this kind of options menu. Okay, it's going to look like that initially. You'll also sometimes see them this way. You see on Google Sheets, you see there's 3 icons here. This is all in the application bar. Okay, turns out these are all menu items. Okay, so you have a search icon, you've got a folder here, and then you've got that triple dot, which we call the overflow. Triple dot is known as the overflow. The ones that are not there in the triple dot are known as actions. Okay, so we have a small number of quick actions that the user can get to, and then the overflow is all the other stuff that the user normally doesn't use. Okay? All right, so we're going to build out that menu, and then we'll look at how we handle the items there. So under resources, we need to add a new resource. So I'm going to right click on res, I'm going to say new, And because we don't have this kind of resource yet, we don't have any menus yet, I'm going to have to go through a special way. So I'm going to say Android resource file here. So everybody see that? Android resource file. Okay. Not telling it what kind of file I'm creating yet. Okay. So I'm going to say Android resource file. The name of this will be menu underscore movie list. Okay. Or movie menu or menu game list. Okay. The resource type, this is where we say what kind of resource it is. So here I need to make sure that I pick menu. Okay. If I pick menu, it's going to change all those drop downs underneath. So now it says, okay, the root element's going to be a menu tag. It's going to go into source set main, and it's going to go into the menu directory. So everybody see that? We don't have a menu directory yet. So it's going to go ahead and create that menu directory. So, name of this is menu movie list, and it's a menu. Add. So now you can see under res, I've got a menu folder, and that contains menu movie list. Okay. It's kind of got a designer similar to how we design a layout or an activity, but it is a little bit different. Okay. There's no layouts here. When we're working with menus, we don't get layouts. All we have is what we just talked about, which is basically menus and items. Okay. If you nest a menu within a menu, well, then you're creating a sub menu, right? So that menu only appears when you click on it. Okay. But for the moment, all I want is to just put the logout button in there. I want a way to do logout from this menu. Okay. So you can see there's a palette. You can see that there's the component tree. You can see that there's a preview. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the menu item and I'm going to add a menu item down here. Okay. So kind of like the other designer, all these need IDs. So this is going to be an ID of, where am I at? So ID would be action sign out. Notice I'm prefixing it with the word action. That's the common convention is for all of our items in this menu, we'll call them actions. Okay? So action sign out, the text is going to be sign out. Okay. If I look at the XML for that, go into split mode, you can see that the XML is very, very simple. There's a menu tag with an item tag inside it. I do need to extract that string, and I'm going to call that action sign out. Good. Okay. So there's my super, super simple menu, one item in it, but that will enable me to add it into my app. Cool? Okay. So anytime you need to add additional options in the menu bar, or in the application bar as it's often known, that's how you're going to do that. You're going to create a menu for that activity. Okay. So back to trying to run this. And again, I'm still running this on my tablet. If you look at this on the tablet right now, you're not going to see any sort of menu yet, right? So if I run the application at this point, the menu exists, but it's not being used. Okay, menu exists, but it's not being used. Let me go to login activity real quick to force this over to the other screen at the moment, so I can just show this on my emulator so you can see it. So I'm going to run that on the emulator just so you can see what's going on. Okay, so movie list, there's no menu bar yet. There's no icons yet. I need to go to the activity, and I'm going to add in an override. So I'm going to say on create options menu. Okay. I need to override that method. And so what I need to do is tell it what menu to use as our options menu. Okay. So the way I create that menu is I use something called a menu inflator. And I say menu inflator, or is it get menu inflator? Get. Yes, get menu inflator. Okay. Get menu inflator dot inflate or dot menu, this is a new kind of resource, the menu movie list. I think that needed a second argument. Right. I believe I need to pass the menu. So the ID, and it's going to go into that menu. This is going to then return, and it returns void. Okay. So I just need to return true. Returning true just says, hey, I have made a menu, we're done. There is a menu that I want you to show. If you return false, then it won't show your menu. So we do have a menu now. So when I go to movie list, you're going to see that there is this triple dot here. Everybody see that? So I can have that triple dot of options. If I had more options, those would all appear when I clicked it. Cool? Okay. And that's fine. You know, that's a starting point. I can respond to that event, but I kind of want this to be a little bit faster to get to than having to click the triple dot and then click sign out. I want them to just be able to click the icon. So in order to get it up into here, I do need to make an icon for it. You can't get it up as an action with just text. All the actions have to be icons. Okay. So I need to go into here, make a new vector asset, and I'm going to look up the sign out icon because there is a standard one for that. There it is. It's called Logout. So I'm going to add the Logout icon. I see Logout. Next. Finish. Okay, so now I have the Logout icon. I can use that here.
What did you search?
I look for Logout. Okay. So I'm going to change the menu resource just a little bit to use my new Logout icon. Oddly enough, while you can set icons on every option in your menu, every item in your menu, those icons, at least as present, are only shown in Android if it's in the action bar. So in order to get to actually show up there, I also need to say show as action and say show as action always. We're going to say it's always shown. What that's going to do is it's going to pull it out of the overflow menu and make it always visible to the user. That's an action.
So how would you have done that with the palette? You can't just grab it.
I could have done that through the designer. If I was going to do that through the designer, I'm going to go back to design. I would just click on here and go change it here.
Oh, okay.
The properties are all here.
So everything is a menu item regardless of whether it's showing as an icon or not?
Yes.
Okay.
If it's showing as an icon or not showing as an icon, it's still a menu item.
Okay, I just want to make sure because the hierarchy here made it look like you could put things at the same tier as menu and make it show up on the bar.
Yeah.
I didn't know. Okay.
So the only reason I did that through code is it actually is just kind of faster. to do it through code. I mean, I find with these menus that Designer is not that helpful. It doesn't speed up my workflow that much, so I usually just do it through code. But you can do it either way. I just usually find it faster to run that way. Code. So, cool. So where you should be is this icon that appears, but doesn't do anything yet. What'd you say?
I'm just saying, looks beautiful.
Yeah, it looks great. You know, it's up in the right corner. It's very easy for the user not to accidentally click it. And so if they're clicking that, we know that you need to log out. We need to pop up a dialog if we needed to. Yeah.
Possible we have like different sets of these icons because if I search, I need to log in. Oh no, it's popping up. Okay, never mind. Sweet.
That's it. So you call it IC logout. Okay. So that's the UI, the view part of it, right? That's how we get an icon up there, is we just have to go through this menu process. We go back to here. So I've overridden already on create options menu. On create option menu says, what menu do I want to show? So I inflate that menu, and then I'm going to go to return true to say, yes, show that. And then in terms of how we handle the options in the menu, that is on option item selected. So when the user picks something from the menu, you go here. It's worth noting there's no on-click listeners, right? For the options in the menu, there's no on-click listener. They all go over here to on option item selected. Okay. Yes.
Can you repeat that?
Huh?
Can you repeat? You just said that.
There's no on-click listeners for your menu items. They all go here on option item selected.
Okay.
So we say based on the option that user selects, do whatever code you need to do, right? So here we've already said we're going to respond to the home button, the home action. I also need to say let's respond to the other action. Okay, so I'm going to add another else case in here. Else if the item ID is r.id.action sign out, which is what I declared, that's where we're going to do our sign out. Cool. So kind of following what I did with the other one, I might say on sign out and call a function and return true. Okay. I don't want to put all of the code here because it would get kind of messy. There would be a little bit too much code in on option item selected if I were to put it into this function. Cool. So I'm going to push the actual code over to another function. So, private void on sign out. Maybe I want to make that public. I'm going to go ahead and make that public. Public void on sign out. Okay. So then what do we need to do to sign the user out? Well, we have to go back and look at the Firebase docs and see what they say. So from that perspective, under Firebase UI, what they tell us is the way to sign out is we say auth UI dot get instance dot sign out and then add an on complete listener, which is kind of similar to stuff we've seen before because we've already used this kind of the tasks before. We said, hey, do this in response to a task, right? So that's the code that we need to integrate. Is we need to say, hey, we need to sign out, and we'll do something afterward. So first things first, auth UI, I can spell, auth UI dot get instance dot sign out. It needs to take a context, which we have, and then we're going to say add on complete listener. It really has, let's see what that is. Complete listener. Oh, that's the result. Okay. So there's a result. It's actually void, so we don't care about it. So that'll get called after the user signed out. Okay. So good thing to do would be to log.i, and I might say log tag signed out. That way we know that it's gone through successfully. Okay. Let me test it real quick here. Oh, I'm missing a semicolon. And click there. Okay. Make sure I'm on the right device. Oh, there we go. You can see signed out. So when it successfully finishes the sign out process, even if it wasn't already, even if the user wasn't signed in, you're still going to get a callback to this function. Cool. So all I need to do from there is I want to send the user back to the login screen, right? So finish. Remember, finish will close the current activity and send you back to the previous activity. So if I just say finish, user comes back here. Cool. And that'll actually solve the problem of you saw the, remember you said about the screen rotation thing now? Because I'm actually logging the user out, current user will be null. So we won't have that screen rotation bug. Yeah.
Can you take a look at this? It's telling me I'm missing a semicolon, but I have no clue why. Oh, this line right here. Like it closes this method. This closes that method.
You didn't return true. This function needs to return a boolean, so you have to say return true.
Oh.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it's actually not talking about semicolons. Yeah. So what I did differently, they didn't show, I typed in that one.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah. And it automatically has the namespace. You have to not start that.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm not getting
Okay. Because you didn't implement the on-crate options. So if you look at my code, you're not seeing a menu because you didn't implement this method. You didn't finish implementing here to say if the user presses that action, you're called.
movie voice.
No, you cannot put it in a base activity. You cannot put it in a base activity when you should not put it. You're not doing this in a base activity. All that code needs to be cannot be anywhere else. It has to be in
Boom.
Ranken website.
I'm in the wrong place.
It has to be. Because you don't want this code to be on any of the other IPVs, you only want it on this one. So all the code we just did needs to be on this activity specifically, not on any other activities. You should have made no changes to these activities.
Okay.
So that needs to be out there, because that's the end of on code. Logout working on? Okay, are you working here? Got all up you to be when you're done now. Okay, so checking in here. How are you doing? So you log in, log out. I just kind of, I would just write on the visualize. Just write on the visualize. Okay, yes, it does. So. Then you can do that all anyway. But that is still recharging. So what I did as a quick workaround. Just to be able to demonstrate things. So what I did is I just enter this out. Even if the user is not logged in, just always send is that cycle process is what the some process is. That's what I did.
Can't you swipe? What the hell?
You shouldn't have an FAB here.
That's just what we installed that one thing way back.
Oh,
It's like always there,
right.
yeah, I just
It's
have
on the
I don't, yeah. So I do it right here, so if I do like, just to make sure like a custom account or whatever. Now it's-
I mean, I think that's, this would, to me, would mean you have to do a sign on for it. Because this appears because you have. What do we see?
But yeah, so if I hit the back button. That's, I don't know if that's mine.
I would need to look at it.
Yeah.
It's here. This is an old player exception. It's saying how you do responsive to one. So yeah, there's some tricks in these. You check for the response being on. Sign up to be in this. Okay, so what we've got here is two parts, right? So we can log in. If what happened to my code now? Am I looking at the right one? Log in, log out. Yeah. That's interesting. Oh, because I'm doing something different. I know why. So I can log in, I can log out. That's two kind of parts of the coin, right? So we've got the navigation part working, right? And you'll notice that I can't hit back to navigate out. So there's no risk of the user accidentally fat fingering something and just logging themselves right out. Cool? And also means that, you know, if I start the app from scratch, if I shut down, because we're forwarding, it's just going to automatically go on to the next thing. Cool? So this works really well for the state of the user kind of being preserved. Okay? The last thing I need to talk about is how do we manage and work with the current user's data. Cool? I'm going to talk about how do we work with the current user's data. So if I'm looking at the view model, let's go back into, say, which view model we got? So we've got movie list view model. If I look at movie list view model, remember I'd hard-coded here that my username is Pierre Smith, right? So everybody see that? So now I need to go over to the point. I need to say, okay, let's use the user ID for the signed in user. Does that make sense? We talk about how do we use the user ID for the signed in user. Okay. So here, I don't want to set it immediately. In fact, I might even want to refactor this a little bit and call this the user ID instead of the username. Okay? So the user ID, we've got a user ID variable. The point at which I can figure out what the user ID is kind of in the constructor, right? So here I can start with that user ID. I need to go down here, and somewhere in the constructor, I can then populate that. So I might say, hey, let's get the user. Maybe I'll do that after the live data is set up. Yeah. So get the user, get current user. And so I might say, hey, Firebase user is equal to Firebase auth dot get instance dot get current user, and then I can just say if there is a user, which there should be. If there is a user, then the user ID is equal to user dot get UID. Okay. Otherwise, if there's no user logged in, well then the user ID is going to be. Make sense? So just adding a little bit of extra code to that constructor for the view model that's going to retrieve the current user's information. All good?
All good.
All good? Okay. Now, I need to fix a few things because remember I was previously referring to username. So, back to where?
I got it.
Yeah. So, you know, here I'm saying, well, where equal to username is equal to username. If I'm going to keep this up and working with what I had, I might just change that over. It might make more sense for me, in fact, to go ahead and change the data in the database even to be user ID over username. The gotcha is if I do that, then I may have to recreate some indexes, right? Because maybe I have indexes that are based on the username field. I may have to delete those, and then recreate new indexes. Now, the good news is for this is I'm only going off of one thing here, so I think I'm safe. I think I'm safe switching this over to user ID. Okay, so user ID is equal to user ID. While I'm thinking about this, I might want to go to the model. So I might want to go to, where was this? I probably should have called this user ID from the get-go, but I didn't do that initially. Under data, I've got, where is it? Movie vote. Yeah, so movie vote is going to be user ID. And is there anything different here? No, there's nothing different about movie vote value. So under this, we're going to rename this column. Basically, it's going to be user ID instead of username. I'm not doing the actual rename. You'll notice there's problems because I kind of want it to break, so I can see where it's gonna fall apart. So I'm going to say, okay, well, let's get the users based on that get my votes based on that username, user ID. And I can say down here, when I add a vote, well, I need to add that as user ID instead of username. I'm going to do the same thing down here. So places where I have username largely are just going to go over to user ID.
Should have just refactored this from the start.
Yeah, I probably should have just called it username to begin with, but I didn't. User ID, just because it's a better name. Okay, so those things are changed over to user ID instead of username. I think that's all I needed. So all those places that changed that were username or user ID now. Okay. So right now we should see that I don't have anything that I voted on. We will see that if I go to my upvotes, you'll see, as I said, it may complain about there not being an index because there's not an index on the user ID plus, the vote value. So for instance, if I go to logcat, follow that, it's going to tell me that I now need a new index for user ID and value. So I'm going to go ahead and add that there. So you may find if you switch things over to say user ID, you may need to create additional indexes. So you can see I've got username ascending, value ascending, user ID ascending. Eventually I want to go and take those old ones out. Okay, so switching over to user ID. What that's going to mean is now it's going to remember it based on the user ID of who's logged in. So if I had this working with logins, which I'm having some issues with my emulator, then it's going to remember those that way. Cool. So the switchover is pretty darn easy. The main thing we have to do is just, instead of hard coding it up here, we just need to use the Firebase API to go get it. Other than that, you really don't have to change much. And so that's going to mean the same thing for like your compose. Your compose is going to need to use this route to get the user ID instead of that. And if you're doing, add to wish list, add to library, it's going to need to be doing this route instead. Cool. I think that's it. Let me check on the physical device, see if I need to do anything else. But I think that's all we needed to talk about today. A lot of it's just working through the APIs. I think if I turned, I might want to turn on the Google auth, but I think we're mostly there. terms of I think in terms of Google Auth, the only thing I was missing is making sure that I provide the Google provider. And I think on the console, I just needed to go back to the console and add that as a sign-in method. And that should work. It should be all that's needed, is add that provider on the back end, and the Google should work. Try to log in here. Mm-hmm.
I have a question. If you get
Yes.
On the on sign out
Uh-huh.
button click,
Yep.
it performs the action. It really does actually sign me out, but it
Uh-huh.
doesn't ever take me back to the login screen. Can you show me the code that you've written? I think I missed a line.
Yeah, you just missed one line. So one of the things to remember when we're dealing with that, where is here? I just need to say finish to close that activity and go back.
I knew that's what it was going to be. So that doesn't really work right for any of our other activities. If you try to sign out on the other activities, say you put that menu option there,
Right.
because that would take you to the parent activity, right?
Correct.
So
It would take you to the previous activity. Not the parent, but the previous.
Oh, the previous. Okay.
The previous. And that's a valid question, right? That wouldn't work on any of the other screens because it would take you back to the previous screen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You don't need to sign out on any other activities.
Fair.
You really don't, and it's generally not a desirable user experience to be able to sign out anywhere except basically that first screen. That's a pretty normal user experience, is that I don't usually want to do that anywhere else. Okay.
Okay.
So it's usually not a problem that you get into. Okay. If it is a problem that you get into, which I really don't think you should be doing for this,
Okay.
what you can do is you can use let me see if I can find it. And I'll share that here.
Crisscrossing.
So what?
This is talking about crisscrossing.
So
Cross-task.
yeah, if you do need to step back more than one step, then you have to use this task stack builder kind of thing, if I remember right, to build up what you actually want, basically the back stack to be. So anytime you're doing a case where you want to step back more than one step, it is more complicated. There's also usually something we want to avoid. Usually you don't want to go back more than one step.
Okay.
We generally want to architect our app in such a way the pressing back always, or there's no case where you would need to step back multiple steps. So that means usually what's happening, if you've got something that feels like it should go back multiple steps, it's usually a case where you've got activity A goes to activity B, and you've architected it so you think, well, C should be able to go back here. Well, what the right way to do it is usually, rather than making a C, is when you go to C, it's just another version of B. It's just a different state of B. So both B and C are contained in this activity,
Interesting.
right? Common cases where you might see that is in like a stepper. Like if you've got a complicated sign-up process that's multi-step, all of those steps are going to be in one activity. So when you finish that registration process, you're still only going back one screen. So it looks like you're going through multiple screens, but you're not actually. Right?
Sounds a lot like React.
Yeah. So it basically comes down to, instead of creating C, use some fragments over on B to put all of that code into the same activity.
That's right. I did read about fragments.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't really use them.
Yeah. We haven't done anything with them. at the
There's so
moment.
much here that we're kind of touching on.
We're touching
like-
on. We're not quite kind of there yet. So
This is exciting.
so that's the login process. That's what I got. And we'll talk about more. The next topic is going to be about how do we do the security rules and such. So we'll talk about that on Wednesday.
Mr. Smith, can you show me your physical device?